Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. You can find us on ltv-eh.org. Just click on the videos and you'll find our show there. You can also find our show on YouTube. You can look for the YouTube channel for LTV, or you can look for my YouTube channel, which is Linda Maria Frank. You will find us on my Facebook page, The Writer's Dream, and also on Cablevision Channel 20 on Thursday afternoons at 3 o'clock. Lots of interesting stuff there. The most interesting, of course, is going to be our guest today. I say this all the time, and he is Dennis Carey. He is a resident of Long Beach Island, which is part of Long Island. He's a beachcomber, lifeguard, surfer, and a pediatric endocrinologist. How's that? He has written a book called Silver Strand, which is a history of Long Beach Island. It's kind of historical fiction wrapped up in a lot of history. This is the second time he's on, and some of the topics that we've covered so far include the Long Island Railroad's Gilded Age, 1880 Long Beach Hotel, the birth of the beach resort, bootlegging and rum running, growth of the village and city, which I don't think we got to, Navy Town during World War II, and ocean playground throughout. So these are all topics that are covered in the book. But when we left off last time, I had asked Dennis what was the most surprising thing he learned from his research. And so we're going to start with that today. So Dennis, without further ado, elucidate.
Oh, well, thank you. Good to be here again. You had asked the question, and I thought about it afterwards, and it was, and I quoted in chapter 6. It was the last chapter I wrote, actually. It was snuck in to the book because I thought it was so valuable, at least historically. And it's called Chautauqua Summers. And I don't know how many people are familiar with Chautauqua, New York, or the Chautauqua Parliament, but in the late 1800s, this Methodist ministry in upstate New York developed their Chautauqua Parliament, and it was really an educational thing, not completely religious. It started out religious as a way of teaching Methodist Sunday school teachers. And it spread throughout the country. But in the post-Civil War time, with the nouveau riche and people with some more free time, they expanded this from religious into an educational thing. And people who went to the Parliament during the summer months would get a golden degree, actually. It wasn't a college degree. It wasn't even a high school degree. But the topics were just very eclectic. They included Rome, Greece, geography, history, the arts. And so it was, I had really never heard of it. And then I found out that for 4 years, the Chautauqua Parliament took over the Long Beach Hotel, which we've talked about, which was built in 1880 by the Long Island Railroad and existed there for 27 years. And so they took over this spot, and I was able to weave some historical fiction into it. A friend of mine told me he had a friend named Creighton Snick. And I said, that has to go in the book. So I gave Creighton Stick, and you'll appreciate this a little bit, hyperthyroidism. And so he was a nervous sort of guy, and that was a lot of fun. And interestingly, in endocrinology also, they brought orphans out there to a little camp they had. And these were children who had a vitamin D deficiency or rickets with malaligned bones and bent bones. And it was sort of miraculous that they talked about how being out there in the sun, which we all know vitamin D is in the sun, and many of these kids who weren't too extreme were able to walk again and do things they hadn't been able to do. So that was the Chautauqua Parliament, which I knew nothing about, and I think is a fascinating thing. And there's very little written about it. Its history in Long Beach beyond what I included. Speaking of characters, I want to talk about a character named Tyrone Canister. Um, the we talked a little bit about the boardwalk in New York, in Long Beach, and the boardwalk was built in 1907, right around the time that the historical hotel burned down. So the boardwalk was being built in 1907, 1908, and William Reynolds, always who the founder of Long Beach, always a showman. Brought in a team of elephants that walked from Coney Island to Long Beach to help build the boardwalk.
Wow.
My mother always talked about that. And so they literally walked down Sunrise Highway and found their way into Long Beach. And there were photos showing them moving houses and moving, uh, heavy lumber. Now, nowadays, people say this was all a publicity stunt and the elephants didn't build the boardwalk. Well, it's partially true. They stayed there for at least 2 months, and they were corralled fairly locally. And then when the winter came, they did go back to Dreamland. And by the way, Dreamland was the third of the major amusement parks in Coney Island. There was Steeplechase and Luna Park and Dreamland, which was built by William Reynolds before he came over to Long Beach. Now, what about Tyrone Canister? Well, when the elephants came, there was a guy who was riding the elephants named Foga Bay. And he had a turban, had the whole thing. Whether he was really an Indian or a Swami, I don't know. But I invented Tyrone Canister, the human cannonball, to accompany him and to be working with the animals. Now, Tyrone Canister had achondroplasia, okay, and in the Game of Thrones mega, movie, HBO movie, Tyrion Lannister was a chondroplastic dwarf. So I took all of that and made the human cannonball a canister. And he is a character that goes throughout the book up into the 1940s. And one of the reasons I mentioned him as a character, because in writing my characters, I always go back to one of my favorite books, The Confederacy of Dunces, by John Kennedy Toole, where he has these very vivid classic characters. And so I try to make these characters as interesting as possible and have interesting traits like I did for Creighton Snick and Tyrone Canister.
So Canister, the name Canister, and he's a human cannonball, right?
Yes, you can imagine at the circus and that they shot people out of cannons.
Yeah. What it brings to mind is that my favorite author is Charles Dickens. And one of the things I love about Charles Dickens is he names his characters in such a way that it evokes their character or what they're doing. Yes. And I think you must have done that with Mr. Canister. Very interesting.
Yeah. So I have here a table of contents for my book, which I use as a tickler as I go along. But moving along, actually going back a little bit, I didn't talk much about the fire. I did mention that the Long Beach Hotel burned down in spectacular fashion in 1907, just about the time that William Reynolds came to town and was going to rebuild this town after all the dredging of the swamps and the waterways into a landmass. And it burned down in July of 1907, and 1,400 people were in the hotel at the time in the morning. It broke out before dawn, and nobody died, but a number of people were injured either from jumping, falling, or getting burned. And the New York Times and other newspapers mentioned that the doctor who was a guest there was Belmont DeForest Bogart. Now, Dr. Belmont DeForest Bogart is definitely Humphrey Bogart's father. That's the truth. He was.
Wow.
And it was said that he and his family were guests. Now, I couldn't prove that Humphrey was there, but I did slip a little humph into the book during that chapter, and I would love to learn more. Humphrey's mother, Maud Humphrey, was much more famous. She was an illustrator in the late 1800s and was a wealthy woman on her own right. And they had a place up in the Finger Lakes, not connected to Chautauqua, but to Seneca Lake, I believe it was. So that was a fascinating thing. Another chapter that to me was very interesting and historical was chapter 10, Shifting Sands. I had a good friend who was a realtor in Long Beach. And after selling a house and it was abandoned, he found left behind a loose leaf binder diary of a Libby Detchen who, as a 15-year-old, lived in the dunes of the west end of Long Beach in 1908, 1909. And Libby wrote prolifically about that time there, where for $25, the family was able to have a horse drag a one-room house to the top of a sand dune where nobody else was, essentially. They family sank a pipe to get water. They sank barrels for an ice box, so to speak, in the cold sand. And they lived there and had fun and did all the Long Beachy things long before. This is simultaneous to further east in town, the Long Beach Hotel entertaining the wealthy. So I thought that was, they named their place Silver Wave, and then other people came in and named their little bungalows Gitchy Gumi, Frying Pan, the Driftwood. And so that was a find that I said, once my friend handed that over to me, I said, I can write a chapter, a fictional and real chapter about that family.
So I have two questions. One is, what did they ever find out what the cause for the fire was that burned the Long Beach Hotel down?
There was a lot of speculation early on. There was one theory that a mother was cooking an infant's or heating up an infant's milk, and with what I think it was an alcohol flame that they used in those days, and that was tipped over and started the fire. There's other speculation that the electricity wasn't put in very well, and there may have been an electrical fire. The biggest and it was a mystery of why it burned down that got me writing this book in the first place. But some people speculated that William Reynolds wanted to start all over, and get rid of the hotel because it was a white elephant, so to speak. And I kind of play around with that whole thesis during the book, but I don't think. And he was a character, but I don't think they had 1,400 people in the hotel and nobody died. Well, I'll leave that up to people who read the book, whether somebody died or the hotel was haunted or not.
The other question I had was, did you get a lot of, well, I won't say a lot. How much stuff did you get that you put in the book from friends, people who've lived on? I mean, you're a lifelong resident of Long Beach, so obviously you know a lot of people on Long Beach. And did you reach out to people, or did people just sort of give you stuff?
I interviewed quite a number of people, and I do give them credit, in the book. One of the most interesting people I met, and this person, Lou Ehrlich, passed away at 103 years old 2 years ago. We just passed his 105th birthday, I believe. And Lou was the oldest living lifeguard in Long Beach for many, many years. He had a great life and moved away and came back. He was one of the first franchisees of Castro convertibles in Boston. And Lou told me stories that were just precious, totally precious. One of his friends was a boxer in Long Beach and fought Joe Louis for the title of the world twice and lost both times. So he gave me a lot of nice ideas. I was just actually on Facebook today with the great grandniece of one of my characters later in the book, who was a chief of the Long Beach Lifeguards in the 1940s, a war hero, a famous wrestling announcer, Paul Besh, and she's in the process of reading the book, and that was just a very fortuitous. And one of Paul Besh's friends, Bernie Haig, gave me one of the best interviews. But I interviewed a number of friends and people that including Roberta Fiore, who was the founder of the Long Beach Historical Society, and really. When she first met me, she was a little suspicious of my project, but she warmed to me, and it gave me a lot of ideas. In fact, jumping ahead to I think it's chapter 15, Hard Times and Good Times. I asked her, the 1930s, the Depression, what can I write about Long Beach? And she said, write about education. Long Beach has a great history of educating, which you can appreciate as an educator. And so, I took that to heart. And one of the reasons education was important in Long Beach, and not the only reason, of course, was that during that time period, many Jewish families moved into the area. So during the hard times, and I do write a bit about the Depression, I do also write about gefilte fish, and I do write about marjar, topics that I know about, but I had to learn in order to write them with any semblance. And to tell you the truth, I had one fellow who was very into my book, and he came up to me in the boardwalk one day, and he said, "Your name is Carey. Was your mother Jewish? Who is Jewish in your family?" And I said, "No, no, I'm not. I have a lot of Jewish friends, but I'm not Jewish." And he said, "I can't believe it. You wrote as if you were a Jew." And we talked about Yiddish last session, and so that I like that type of diversity, and learning about people.
Don't you find that if you live in this area, you know a little Yiddish? You certainly know about Jewish food. I mean, it's really pretty much part of our
Yes.
heritage here on Long Island.
Absolutely. That is so true. And when talking about the Roaring Twenties, actually, before I get off of the 1930s, my mother was a teenager in the 1930s, and one of her friends was a fellow who came for the summer named Morrison Splain. Most people in our age bracket know him as Mickey Splain. So
Yes.
Mickey Splain was a Pulp Fiction author par excellence, starting in the late 1940s. And my mother always told us of how Mickey would tell stories around campfires during the summer, and entertain, and they would go home at night scared and have nightmares. So he was destined to become a writer, and I do use him in the book to tell the very strange story of um, Fate's Star, Fate Star, Faithful. That was her name. It was a real name, and she was a flapper who his body washed up on the shore in Long Beach in the 1930s, and there was a lot of mystery about, which I won't get totally into at all.
Okay, so let's see, what other topics have it? What about the Navy during World War II?
Yeah, so one of William Reynolds' last things that he built in Long Beach was actually in Lido, and he would have taken over all of the rest of the Barry Island, including Lido, if he had had enough money and had lived. But in 1929, the Lido Hotel was built, and this magnificent edifice that's on the beach, right outside of Long Beach proper, and that had a fantastic golf course that was built by Charles Blair McDonald, the most famous American golf course architect. And in 1941, it was taken over by the U.S. Navy at the start of World War II. And they basically took over the hotel, and they actually dug up the golf course, and did amphibious landings, and they had barracks and everything like that. So Long Beach became a Navy town, a military town during that period of time. And the blackout beach had to do with the fact that the rides and the arcades and everything on the boardwalk were lit up at night, and they didn't want to close that down totally. So they put up a screen several stories high that was black along in front of these lit up things, and so that you would not see the lights, or the German subs or boats would not, that they were worried about, would not see them. They also had civil defense air raids and drills, and I have a couple of characters who go through that whole experience in that chapter.
Yeah, I had a father-in-law. He's long passed, but during the war he worked for Western Union, and he said that they worked these very long shifts because all of the information was coming in by telegraph at that time. And he tells the story. They lived in Brooklyn, and they lived right off of Sheepshead Bay. And they said that they actually could every once in a while see a submarine surface in Sheepshead Bay at that time. And of course, we have the history of the German spies that came ashore at Amagansett. And that must have been a very, very scary time.
Absolutely, I would think so. And
I
this,
know I'm sorry, my father was too old to be drafted. So he was a air raid warden. And I was a little girl at the time. And I remember that he would go out with his helmet and whatever he did when he was out there telling people to, pull down their blackout shades. And my mother would have us sit under a card table with a candle, waiting for dad to come home. I was terrified.
yeah, but they blackened out all the south-facing, ocean-facing sides of the lamppost, and they were total blackouts. You couldn't go out and drive.
Mhm.
In fact, you had to make sure that everything was off. It's interesting. I have a great uncle that worked for Western Union during that same time period, and my mother used to always say that he was the last Morse code operator for. Um, Western
Sure.
Union in New York.
Right. Yeah, I know. I mean, my father-in-law um, ended up as the wire room chief at the Daily News before they switched to computers. So very interesting career. There's so many interesting things happened in this part of the world. How about bootlegging?
Bootlegging, it's the Roaring Twenties is my second favorite chapter, and I have one of the things that probably every family in Long Beach had something to do, and every family in Long Island you hear about. Certainly, it was the least paid attention to law that it was ever passed in the United States. So, bootlegging and rum running, the beach towns lent perfectly to do that, whether it was going through the back bays or going out to the international limit where the real McCoy was set up by to buy. There was like a shopping mall there where you offered rye, scotch, rum, of course. That's why they were called rum runners. There's a book by Clive Cussler called The Bootlegger, which does include, it does mention Long Beach and several towns across Long Island during this fictional treat to bootleg. And of course, Boardwalk Empire on HBO, it's kind of mirrored that whole thing in New Jersey. In fact, Arnold Rothstein, who's hardly featured in that series, did have a footprint in Long Beach, and was his minions were selling heroin and cocaine back in the 1920s, which you don't even think that was going on, but it was right there in Long Beach. They used carrier pigeons to send there, and they finally got outed because the people didn't like all the pigeons flying around and pooping on their lawns and houses. So that was it. The other great time period was the 1910s, and that's because the Irene and Vernon Castle um, came to Long Beach. If people aren't familiar with them, Irene and Vernon Castle were Fred and Ginger before Fred and Ginger were Fred and Ginger, and they popularized ballroom dancing after they took Paris by storm, came back to the United States, opened clubs in New York, and they were invited to come to Long Beach, and Castles by the Sea on the boardwalk was opened, and they were there for a period of time during the height of their fame. And they actually did a movie called The Whirl of Life, a black and white silent film that shows the dance to the Castles by the Sea in Long Beach and shows them dancing. Now, they were as famous as anybody in the United States at the time. And they would have been more famous to people, except unfortunately, Vernon, who was a pilot in World War One. He left. He was a Brit, and he went and flew airplanes for the Canadian Air Force. He survived Europe, but couldn't survive a training flight in Waco, Texas, Fort Worth, Texas area, or I think it was. In 1970, just days before the armistice, and so she went on. She did some movies. She was she popularized the bob hairdo, okay, and the short hair that became fashionable during the 1920s for the flappers, and so they were. The most interesting thing about them is that I learned was that my mother told me this late in her life that my grandmother, who I knew as Irene Hurley McCarthy, and had a sister, a cousin named after. Her real name was not Irene; it was Bridget Hurley.
Oh, there we go.
And that was considered too Irish. Bridget was considered too Irish, so she was enamored of Irene Castle and changed her name to Irene.
Well, these are really fascinating stories, and we have about a minute left. So, what was your absolute favorite thing?
Well, the absolute favorite thing is tying everything together with the Lost Staff of St. Patrick, and we haven't talked about that today. But that's a mystery that goes through the book. And in the last three chapters, I pretty much tie that together. The first chapter is the prologue, where a couple gets swept away in Hurricane Sandy. So at the end of the book, I come back to Sandy, and I leave that up to the reader.
Yes, absolutely. You have to leave the mystery up to the reader. This was fascinating. I love Long Island, and I love the history, and the more I learn about it, the better I like it. So what's next?
What next? Well, I'm working on the manuscript I mentioned, a travelogue. I'm looking for a title, and maybe Life is a Highway, or 40,000 miles of good road that from all the trips I've done cross country. And I have a lot of anecdotes from that. And I'm putting, my story along with visiting all these national parks during the bicentennial year, 50 years ago. And I hope to get it out for the semi-quincentennial this year.
What a great idea. What a great idea. Thank you so much, Dennis.
And thank you for having me. And oh, by the way,
come back.
This is my book, and it is on Amazon. And I think you'll love it. The great stories and more than I talked about.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
LTV's programming is made possible by the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature.